Today we're going to be ranking the second Doctor's era, played by Patrick Troughton. Let's dive straight into it with the power of the Daleks. The power of the Daleks instantly goes to the top. There is something about this story that is so not only important, but it's also just brilliant the whole way through it. Maybe 6 episodes is too long for this story, but I think they managed to fill the runtime with enough action and drama that it works. Not only are we establishing Patrick Troughton as the new Doctor, but establishing him as a replacement for the only Doctor. This entire story and the future of the series relies on him and his performance, and I think he instantly knocks it out of the park. Instantly, there is this sense of menace and mystery within his Doctor that had always been a part of the Doctor's character, but even more so. There is something about Patrick Troughton as a performer who is just so brilliant and so captivating to watch that even though we only have the audio and an animation, you can still feel his performance in just his words and what he has to say and how he chooses to deliver it. Even Ben and Polly get a little bit more to do than usual because they're confused about who this person is. They don't really trust him, but Polly instantly has this rapport with him, and it's just brilliant. The Daleks are at their scariest that they have ever been throughout the entire run up to this point. They're scheming, they're up to something, and it's really, really great. Next up, we have the Highlanders. This story doesn't overly excite me. It's never been something I've been a massive fan of. A lot of people love this story because it introduces Jamie McCrimmon. So it's an important story in Doctor Who's history. So it's a story I would love to see returned or animated one day. But the actual concept of it doesn't overly excite me. I mentioned when I was talking about the Hartnell era that I really enjoy historicals where they're in a situation where it's really, really dangerous. And there is a sense of danger in this, but it doesn't have that overwhelming sense of dread that something like the Reign of Terror has. I think it's one of those stories that I can't really have a really strong opinion on unless it came back or it was animated, because based on just the audio and photo reconstruction, I don't feel like I have a really good sense and grasp of the story. Next up is the Underwater Menace. This story is also just okay. I love certain elements of it. I love how deliciously camp it is, but that feeling of menace that was established in Power of the Daleks feels like a lifetime ago now. Although he is playing the fool in order to get what he wants and get information out of people, it does feel like he's playing it a little bit more silly. But you can tell he's taking it seriously though. I love the design of the fish people. I think they're very camp. And I love Professor Zaroff. I think he is so funny. Like, nothing in the world can stop me now is just brilliant. It's just one of those all-time moments that sticks with you. It was brilliant when one of the episodes returned in 2011, and it really makes you want the whole story. Because I think if you sat down and watched the whole story in live action, it would just kind of work. I think it's just going to make sense. But when you're flipping between animation and live action, it just doesn't really have the vibe that I'm looking for. Next up is the moonbase. And this story really established the Cybermen as what we know today. They are more of a strength, like an army, and they feel like a real menace. And I really enjoy them in this story. They come across as really spooky, like lurking in the shadows. And Patrick Troughton has completely found his Doctor at this point. This is one of his best performances in his entire run, because the Doctor is only as good as the villain he is like coming up across. So I think this is one of those ones where it works really well. Once again, the Doctor is really established now as someone who is fighting for good, who is trying to stop the evil in the universe. He has found his place in the universe now. He knows his own identity and he's created it separate from the Time Lords. And it's the opposite of the Time Lords. He's a rebel, he's an outsider, and he does what he thinks is right because he thinks what the Time Lords are doing is wrong, just watching and observing. And you can see that in the story without even knowing of the Time Lords. Next up, we have the Macra Terror, which is one of my favorite missing episodes of all time. There is something brilliant about this story that just works. And I think that if the original story came back, wouldn't have the same menace that the audio does, because the macra and how they were made isn't the most well-executed monster in Doctor Who's history, let's just say that. But the actual story itself, setting it in this spooky colony in the far future where everyone's very, very happy all the time. And there's that menace underneath of it, literally underneath it, with the crabs living beneath the city and controlling them is just really brilliant. And it's one of those things where Doctor Who takes from literature, it takes from 1984 and it makes it Doctor Who. It gives it a Doctor Who twist, and I think that works really, really well pretty much all of the time. Next up, we have the faceless ones, and I put that in the okay category. I think the story is just too long. I don't think it really has enough drama and momentum to really stretch the 6 parts, but I think they tried their best with it, by changing the location for the final 2 episodes to really try and make it work, but I just don't think there was as much juice in this lemon. I think it was squeezed by the end of episode 4. I think this is one of those stories that if the original survived, we'd enjoy it a lot more because the location filming looks really interesting because it's at an airport and it's really different. And it has a real scary vibe to it that I think is a little bit missing from the animation. Next up, we have the Evil of the Daleks. Just looking at my tier list so far, it's either the best or just okay. That just shows that season 4 really has real big ups and downs, and I think Evil of the Daleks really ends the series on a high note. And I think, yes, 7 episodes is probably too much, but if it was just 6, it would have been perfect. The good thing about this story is that we change to 3 massively different locations. We start in 60s swinging London, which is such a great backdrop. It's brilliant. And then we go to Victorian, Edwardian London. I'm not sure, I think Victorian. And that's brilliant as well. And then we move to Skaro, the Daleks' home planet, since we haven't seen their original appearance in the Daleks. And it's so exciting. It feels so big and epic, and it feels like a proper send-off for the Daleks. And it's kind of crazy to think they were like, we're done with the Daleks. We gave them 2 of their greatest stories ever. And then we said, enough is enough. Let's move on. And I really admire that. I admire that because, the Daleks don't really appear again, except for little cameos until the John Pertwee era. The introduction of Victoria Waterfield is also a brilliant character. And I really enjoy her, even though she is a bit limited for what she can do. One of the scenes that really sticks out to me from the photo reconstruction is where Maxtable is turned into a Dalek and he's like reaching out and he's like, kill, kill, kill. And the telesnap is like terrifying. It is a really scary and spooky looking image that unfortunately the animation just can't recreate. It's really hard to create that sort of menace in a cartoon. But I think the animation does a really good job at honouring the original production, and it's a really good watch. Evil of the Daleks is one of those stories that I would love to come back to the BBC's archive. It's just so brilliant. And it's a great way to end Patrick Troughton's first season. And this first season has a really bold vision of what Doctor Who is, and it redefined the show forever. And I think future incarnations of Doctor Who are really based off this era, rather than the Hartnell era. And I think that's probably for the best. Next up, we have Tomb of the Cybermen, which I think was my first ever Patrick Troughton story, and I instantly fell in love with him. His relationship with Jamie is just something that's so electric. And by this point, their repertoire between each other is just so wonderful. The Cybermen are even spookier than they were in the moonbase. And the sets of the Tomb of the Cybermen and these massive, huge ice crypts is just brilliant. That blending of like Egypt, the mummy mythology, and the Cybermen is such a great parallel to make. And they just really work on the planet Telos. The shots of them awakening from their tombs are like some of the most iconic imagery in Doctor Who's history. So when I first watched it, it was just really thrilling. The Abominable Snowman is one of those stories that is really, really good, but it's just too long. At 6 parts, because it lacks a musical score, so it's just atmospheric sounds. It has a real menace to it, especially with Padma Sambavar, who is really, really scary and has a brilliant voice. And there is this sense of dread and doom throughout the entire production. You can feel it from just the audio. And I think the animation did its best to replicate that, but I don't think it 100% got it. This is one of those stories I would love to see returned because the surviving episode we have of episode 2 is really, really great as well. And I think the Great Intelligence instantly sets itself up as an incredible villain. And the Yeti are really cute and cuddly and cool. And they're menacing too, they're strong. And it's that perfect blend of Doctor Who goodness where the monster is cute but also scary. Next up we have the Ice Warriors. This story is not for me. I love the Ice Warriors. I love the setting. I love the Ice Warrior caked in ice and how it's melting and comes out. And I love all that stuff. But I'm sick of hearing about that goddamn ionizer. The entire story is about the weather. And if you've ever had like a conversation with someone you don't really know and you start talking about the weather and it doesn't really go anywhere and it's really, really boring, imagine that for 6 episodes straight. That is the Ice Warriors. Very, very dull. Very, very dull. And it's sad because it's such a beautiful location that it could be really, really scary and really, really tense and really, really cool, but it's just not. Next up is The Enemy of the World. When this episode came back in 2013, it was really, really exciting because it was a story that people weren't necessarily clamoring for it to return, but everyone was really pleasantly surprised when it turned out to be really, really good. At this point, I had not seen the telesnap reconstruction of the story, so I didn't really have any connection to it whatsoever, apart from like basic facts of what it is. So when I first watched it, it was really exciting because it was like a brand new story of Doctor Who that I'd never seen before. And I really enjoyed it. I liked that it was location hopping a lot, but it had a really good story beneath it as well. A lot of people say it's like, what if Doctor Who did James Bond? And I can see the parallels there. So if you haven't seen The Enemy of the World, you have to watch it. It's really, really good. Next up, we have The Web of Fear. This whole season is all about incredible locations. They really thought about what is a really great place for Doctor Who to turn up. You know, you had the tombs on the planet Telos, you had the snow in the Ice Warriors, you had the mountains of Tibet in the Abominable Snowman, and now you've got the London Underground. You know, these are really unique and different locations that the show hasn't really gone to before. Like the London Underground, it's really dark and spooky and you're stuck there and they can't escape. And there's this menace that's coming towards you. It's brilliant. It's a stroke of genius. And the set designers went above and beyond for this one. And the redesigned Yeti are such an improvement. It is such a great story. And it's really sad that the 3rd episode is sadly missing from the BBC's archive because the story feels incomplete. It feels like we're missing an important chunk of the story and we're distracted by an animation. Whereas if you get the full story and it's live action, you can really, has a good momentum to it where it loses its flow with that animated episode. It's a pivotal story in the series as well because you've got the introduction of the Brigadier, the Colonel at this point, and that obviously has a huge ramifications on the future of the show as well. Even to this day, we've still got Kate Stewart turning up, you know, it's still a part of the show's fabric. So it all comes down to the Web of Fear. Next up is Fury from the Deep. This is one of those stories that desperately needs to return to the BBC's archive. The audio itself is so menacing and it's so creepy and weird. It's the same sense as like the Macra Terror. They both have very similar vibes where the sound design is terrifying. So it makes you think, oh, does the original production match that? Or is just the sound design really good? But the idea of like menacing seaweed is something that's really difficult to pull off and make it scary, but I think they succeeded. I think the animation does a decent job at telling the story and tries to give it some atmosphere, but it's really hard to tell like a scary story as a cartoon. It just is. But I think the story is just so good that you can enjoy it, even if it was just like clip art. Next up, we have The Wheel in Space. This story to me is just okay. It's a little bit dull. I think the Cybermen's like plot is a bit vague and I don't really love the characters that much. I don't feel attached to these people and I just don't think it's very menacing. I think it's probably the Cybermen's most weak appearance in Patrick Troughton's era, but it's nice to get a space station. So I enjoyed that. And I really enjoyed Iz Skinner's animation of it. I think it told the story really, really well. And it feels like the original came back in a sense. You know, if you squint your eyes, you really think, oh, this looks how the original would have looked. And they did a really good job at recreating it. Next up, we have The Dominators. This story is not for me. It's long, it's boring. I don't care about the villains. I don't care about the setting. It just has no appeal to me whatsoever. I think I've seen it twice, so I don't really want to comment on it too deeply. And it's something that I will probably think about more when the season 6 collection box set eventually comes out. And I'll give it another shot and I might change my mind and I might really enjoy it, but it's just not for me. Next up, we have The Mind Robber. This story is great. I love the story. It's only 5 parts and I love the idea of Doctor Who sidestepping into like the fantasy realm, but it works within the universe of Doctor Who. You know, we've stepped into the land of fiction and these things are possible in this parallel universe. It's something that I wouldn't want every single week of Doctor Who, but every now and then it's a really nice welcome change. I think you could argue that this story can sometimes suffer from a play school effect. It feels like we're on a studio and it can look a little bit cheap at times. But I think within the sense of that it's a fictional land where these things are not real, it actually kind of works and it actually benefits it. Next up, we have The Invasion. Now this is a brilliant Cyberman story. Well, it's not even like that much of a brilliant Cyberman story so much, it's just a brilliant story in itself. The Cybermen don't even turn up for quite a long time, but you feel their menace in the background. They're always coming, they're always on their way. Tobias Vaughan is one of the greatest Doctor Who villains of all time. He is so brilliant, and how he's always calling out for his assistant being like, Parker! It's so iconic and it sticks in your head and you remember that name. You know, and you don't really think about like the villain's assistant so much until maybe Davros and Nida in Genesis of the Daleks. It's a name that sticks in your head because it's such a great performance, it's such a great role. And Packer really feels that role. It's sad that there's 2 episodes missing from The Invasion, but the animation is so good that my brain doesn't think of The Invasion as a missing story. It feels complete because the animation and its direction is as good as the live action version because the live action is so well directed and so is the animation. They complement each other really, really well. One is not better than the other, and that's really rare. Usually that the live action will be a massive improvement or the animation will be a massive improvement. To find one that is a nice middle ground is unique and special. As you can tell, I really like The Invasion. I have this replica Cybermen helmet that my friend Aaron J. Klimas made many, many years ago and sold it to me. It's getting a bit old, it's starting to fall apart a bit, but that's because I'm getting old too. It's a sad reflection of my own mortality. If only there was a way to be upgraded so I was immortal as some sort of metal man. Something to think about. Mwah. Next up, we have the Crotons. What is there to say about this story? I like Zoe. I like that the Doctor has an umbrella. I like the voice of the Crotons. Let's just say the Crotons is not for me. Next up, we have the Seeds of Death, which is the triumphant return of the Ice Warriors and cements their place as a formidable threat. They are brilliant in this story and shows that the Ice Warriors deserve to return. They deserve to be a part of Doctor Who's wider pantheon of monsters. They are spooky and scary. They have a great voice, great design, and I just adore them. And this story is brilliant. It's 6 episodes, so sometimes it can be a bit of a slog to watch. It's not something you really want to sit down and watch in one big sitting like some other 6-parters. But I just really enjoy the setting and I think it's a really good story. And I'm really overdue a watch of it again, to be honest. Next up, we have the Space Pirates, and a surprise to no one, this one is not for me. It's one of those stories that if it survived, it might be up 1 category. It might be just okay. The Doctor and his friends are barely in it for the beginning, and the characters just aren't very exciting. The locations aren't very exciting to look at either. They're very bland. I'd be interested to see if an animation, if they like redesigned the whole thing and made it like this big zip zappy thing, that if it would be more interesting. But I really don't hold any hope out for it, to be honest. I'm not clamoring for the Space Pirates. And finally, we end on the War Games, which is one of the most ambitious regeneration stories in Doctor Who's history. 10 parts, and it's so brilliant. Yes, it is too long, but it manages to, with the amount of location hopping, it manages to tell a story that never feels like it's slow. It never feels like it's being dragged out. There's stuff to do in each zone. And the stuff with the Time Lords being revealed is so brilliant. Jamie and Zoe's departure is so sad. And it's just one of the greats. When you're watching it the whole time, you can feel like something big is coming. Like little mentions of the Time Lords and the Doctor's people. little hints at this is coming to the end for the Doctor. It feels like there's a real menace and there's a real sense of foreboding. And it's brilliant. It's really, really good. And I think the colorization did a good job at adding a little bit of that forebodingness in there. But there's a difference between a cut down version and a full length version, of course. And so that's the Patrick Troughton era. I love the Patrick Troughton era. His Doctor was my favorite for a very, very long time until Bill Hartnell snuck in and stole that spot from him. But I will always love this era. I will always love his missing episodes. And hopefully one day we get to see more of his live action episodes returned to the BBC's archive. So what do you think of my tier list? I'm seeing a lot of best and greats here. I feel like I'm very divided. I either love it or I don't with this era. And I feel like that's a pretty accurate interpretation. I think when the second Doctor gets really good stories, they're amazing. And when he doesn't, they're just a bit eh. But what do you think? Do you disagree with my list or what? Let me know in the comment section below. Next time, we'll be talking about the third Doctor, played by Jon Pertwee. Yeah, whatever. Don't forget to click below to subscribe to the official Josh Nares YouTube channel.